Regina.
Okay, nice to meet you.
Same here. Thank you.
All right, just about got that up. Just a couple more clicks. Sometimes the software is fast, sometimes the software is slow, but it gets there in the end. All right, put that over there. Aaron, good to see you. Just give it another minute as we wait.
All right, good to see you, Rabbi.
Then we will get down to work.
Hey, Rabbi,
Yes.
when I used the word procedural, what I was talking about last week, and I probably should have clarified it, is I think like Rambam used to call it the statutory commandments. But he said that even the statutory commandments, there's substance behind them.
Right. So
Right. That's what I was talking about last week. Sorry.
okay. The terminology, yeah, definitely was not what I was familiar with, but I think I understand what you mean. That you mean commandments that appear to be only of descriptive do's and don'ts, that don't appear to have a particular ethical, moral, or spiritual underpinning, have something underneath them, even if we haven't been able to identify it.
Right. So like the distinguishments, like the offer between if it comes out through a C-section, I don't want to talk too much about giving birth because I don't know anything about it, or versus the other way, the normal way.
Right.
Yeah, it's just that seems like I'll use the word statutory. Just in my field, statutory means something else.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think I understand now the distinction you were going for.
Yeah, but I mean, it's like, what's the reason behind that distinction between the C-section and the regular way?
Well, again, I mean, that comes back to the original language in the Torah, and the original language in the Torah is trying to emphasize different aspects of life. It doesn't make one better or worse, but it does mean that we should notice distinctions.
Right.
That's like, when we say Havdalah, we say bein kodesh lechol. It's the distinction between the holy and the non-holy, the non-sacred, and the non-sacred is good. 6 days of the week are made up of whole, are made up of the regular days, the non-sanctified, and we like those days, and they are important and part of God's creation. The same thing, or lechoshech, we may make a distinction between light and darkness, but we need both. Like we say in Arvit, in the Ma'ariv Ravim service, or in the prayer, we say that we thank God for both. So it doesn't have to preference one over the other. It doesn't have to laud one over the other. It just means that we notice that there are differences, and when there are differences, they are handled differently.
Yeah, but I was just wondering about talking about the reasons for the distinctions.
Well, I'm not sure that I'm going to come up with something that will be useful enough for this part of the conversation.
I know not all of them are easy to figure out. Some of them are hard to figure out.
Absolutely, and some of them, even what we figure out, may or may not be the accurate reason, which is why we comply, even if we're not sure of the cause of the distinction. All right, and with that in mind, because I'm going to jump on that as a segue, we are continuing in chapter 1 of Keritot, and we're going on with Mishnah number 6. And speaking of topics which sometimes defy our understanding, we are going to be dealing with a very niche case, a very specific set of circumstances in Mishnah number 6, in the already difficult to understand this topic of the purity laws following childbirth. So our commentary for the Mishnah gives us a little bit of it. So we're going to start off with that introduction, and then we'll discuss that a little bit, and then we'll get into the unique case that's being argued about, as Mishnah 6 is dealing with an argument between Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai. between the two great academies of their time. So let's deal with the general introduction. As always, the lighter text means that this is the commentator translator, and the bold text is the close to the original Mishnah itself. The Mishnah, again, I'll remind people, are the footnotes, not the footnotes, they are the class notes, the lesson plan of the teacher, and they were never meant to be only recited. They were meant to be said and explained, which is why we have this two-tone text to try and make life easier for us. So let's deal with the general topic first. A woman who gives birth to a daughter counts 14 days during which she is ritually impure. If it is a boy that was born, it's only 7 days. That is followed by 66 days during which she remains ritually pure, even if she experiences a flow of blood. Again, it's half as long if it was a boy that was born. So what that means is that for the first 14 days, and we're dealing with the daughter case here, in the first 14 days after childbirth, she is ritually impure. Then she would go to the mikveh, and she would then be considered ritually impure for the next 66 days, regardless of whether or not there are other signs of blood, of discharges during that period. That means that she is not treated as somebody in nida, somebody during the ritual separation of the purity period of taharat mishpacha, during that 66 days, regardless of the number of incidences, the signs of blood flow. So that is a very unique situation, a unique window of time during that 66-day period. If you can do the math, you'll notice that 14 plus 66 means that you end up with a 2-month period all told. And that means the Torah obligates a woman to bring her offering on the 81st day. If you go to Leviticus 12, 1 through 6, which I'll just show you again how great Sepharia is, you click there, and boom, we are into the actual chapter of Tazria, which we looked at a little bit earlier on, and we can see that we have the issue first with regards to a boy, and then with regards to a girl. And in both cases, on the completion of the period of her purification, she brings to the priest an offering. So that offering is what is being talked about in our Mishnah 6. And that comes then on the 81st day. I should point out that is the first opportunity for her to bring it, but it is not the last opportunity. If she can't bring it on the 81st day for some reason, she can bring it afterwards as soon as possible. All right, so Adkan, up till here, this is the normal case. She gives birth to a daughter, 14 days are spent with ritual impurity as her status, regardless of any signs. Following that, she goes to the mikveh, and the next 66 days, she is considered ritually pure, again, regardless of the signs. Any blood that is seen during that time is considered to be blood from the delivery, and therefore has no status that would cause any separation. So after that period, she is now able to then, and required to then come to the temple and to make the offering that is connected with the birth process, the Tazria offering. All right, everybody with me so far? Because if we don't have that basic, then the next, paragraph is going to get really, really confusing. It's already confusing enough. Okay, so with that in mind, now we get to the special case for tonight. If the woman miscarries another fetus before that day, meaning between the birth of her first child or the miscarriage of her first child and the 81st day, if she has another miscarriage, then she is not required to bring an additional offering. It's considered as though she had twins, meaning that she wouldn't bring 2 offerings for each of the children. She would bring only one. And in this case, the 2 miscarriages, or the 1 live birth and 1 later miscarriage during this 80-day window, would be considered to be covered by the 1 sacrifice that she would bring on the 81st day. Everyone's good on that? They understand that if there is an additional miscarriage. Now, What are the odds of that happening? Fairly low. Most women who miscarry cannot conceive quite that quickly. It's not impossible, but it's not common. And likewise, a woman who gives birth to a live child usually will not conceive and then miscarry in that 80-day window either. But it is conceivable. And since it is conceivable, the law has to cover it. And like I said, if it's within that 80-day window, there is no question she only brings one offering, and that is sufficient for either the live birth plus miscarriage or the 2 miscarriages that were back to back. Okay, now we get complicated, or rather we get to the point of the argument. In the case of a woman who miscarries a fetus on the night of, that is to say, preceding the 81st day, Beit Shammai deem her exempt from bringing a second offering, and Beit Hillel deem her liable to bring a second offering. So this means that we are in the night of the 81st day, and she has another miscarriage. Well, or the first miscarriage, depending upon the status of the first birth. Does she get covered by the one sacrifice per 80-day rule, or is she not covered by the one sacrifice per 80-day rule, because technically this is the beginning of the 81st day? Right, this would be the erev of that 81st day. So technically she's into the next day, but not quite into the next day, meaning daytime. And that's going to be an important distinction. Beit Shammai says that if it's during the nighttime period, that she does not need to bring a second offering, that she is covered by the offering she is already planning to bring from the birth that happened 80 days ago. Beit Hillel, on the other hand, say that since this is on the evening of the 81st day, and she only is exempt during the 80-day window, that technically that offering for the first does not cover the second miscarriage that just happened. All right, does everybody understand the positions they're taking, not their arguments? We haven't gotten to the arguments of why they have this position, but you understand Beit Shammai says she needs only one sacrifice, and Beit Hillel says she needs 2. Okay.
Rabbi, I got a question.
Yes, sir.
Where do they get the word, and maybe this is a translation issue, but this is the first time where I see them count a new day by day. I know obviously the night starts the new day, but is there like a translation difference? Because you hear the word new day all the time when reading this stuff, and am I missing something where day in Hebrew here is different than they usually translate day?
No, you're not missing anything. When it says the night of the 81st, first of all, the word day doesn't actually appear in that language yet, not the part that we've read.
Is it Yom?
What?
Is it Yom?
Well, no, because we're talking in the paragraph here. I'll just roll up for it here. That when we have this, when we have it on this this evening of the 81st, that it is it's not Yom, but that the main word they're going to use for daytime for this period is the or. That is to say the light, but it's the end of the light, meaning the beginning of. So they're contrasting between or and Yom in this particular case. So or is representing the nighttime, and Yom is representing the daytime. And that's not very unusual. That's not always the case, but it's not a strange usage for the technical language.
Because this is the first time I've seen them differentiate between the actual daytime.
Well, and we're going to see in their argument the reason why Beit Shammai differentiates and Beit Hillel doesn't differentiate. And it does have to do with, is there a difference between nighttime and daytime? And for most things in Jewish law, there really aren't differences. When we're writing down what day it is, it's going to be the same day, whether it's day or night. And the day indeed starts in the nighttime. However, there are a few cases where there are things you can do in day that you can't do at night. And that's going to be part of the argument that they're having. So the issue is going to hinge upon, is there a distinction between the nighttime of the day and the day of the day? So you're on the right track, but let's see how they begin to justify these two different positions and how the position of the sun figures into it. That maybe there's more to it than just the calendar date. So Beit Hillel said to Beit Shammai, meaning they are going to ask a question: what is different between the night of the 81st day and the day of the 81st, right? They're asking the same question that you're asking, which is, wait, all the other places, if we say it is on the 81st day, we mean the 81st day of the calendar. And that begins at nighttime and continues through the daytime of the next, what in modern American systems we would call the day, right? Friday night all the way through until Saturday night counts as Shabbat. And if you break Shabbat in Friday night at 10 p.m., or you break Shabbat on Saturday morning at 10 a.m., it's still breaking Shabbat. The daytime of Shabbat is not holier than the nighttime of Shabbat, and vice versa. So
Erev Pesach, no. You have an obligation to eat matzah in Erev Pesach, but not during the day.
Right. So there are certain mitzvot which are given with more specific time, like the Seder or Korban Pesach, which was part of the Seder, that need to be done at the evening time. But generally speaking, the day is the entire 24-hour period. And Beit Hillel wants to know why, in this case, you would make a distinction. Sure, on Pesach, as a good example, there is a reason to make distinction, but that's because we have a very explicit mitzvah, which tells us to do that at night and not to leave anything over till morning. And it's very, very clear that there's a distinction from the Torah. Beit Hillel is going, I don't see that distinction in this case. In the case of the purity and the sacrifice that's being done after the birth, I don't see why you would make a difference between night of 81st and the daytime of the 81st.
Actually, yes, Rabbi, there is a difference. During the first Mishnah of Brachot, when we saw that the Kohanim, they need to purify after the whole day, they start in the evening, the purification.
Okay, so you're getting ahead of the Mishnah.
Really? I didn't know.
Well, wow. Partly. You're on the right track of where we're going to go.
Okay.
But the idea is that maybe with regards to purity, maybe there are some issues. And that's where we're going to go. So Beit Hillel first is going to point out that there's no difference when it comes to ritual purity. That's their position. So if they're equal with regard to the halachot of ritual impurity, which he thinks they are, why is that? Because the blood flow of this woman on the 81st night renders her ritually impure, and all the standard strictures of ritual purity apply to her. Meaning, if she has a blood discharge on the night of the 81st, then she would indeed be considered ritually impure, just like we saw in the introduction for this Mishnah, that the grace period where we don't worry about the discharges ends on day 80. So if in the night of the 81st she has a sign of a blood flow, then the standard rules apply to her. So if those standard rules apply to her from the night as well as the day, will the two time periods not be equal with regard to liability to bring an additional offering as well? Right? If it's the same, if it's the night or day, if she shows a sign of blood, then why would it not be the same night or day with whether she needs to have an additional offering?
And that's Beit Hillel.
That's Beit Hillel's challenge to Beit Shammai. And it's a pretty good challenge, right? If she shows any sign of blood on the night of the 81st, it is counted the same as if she showed it in the morning of the 81st. So if she showed it the night of the 81st and it renders her ritually impure, why would it not also make her responsible for bringing a second offering? right? If it can render her impure, then surely it counts as a separate status, that her status has gone back to neutral, and this new sign of blood moves her from neutral to impure. And if that happens, then why would we not also say that if it was a miscarriage, that it would move her status from neutral to having had a miscarriage, a new miscarriage, which means a second sacrifice, right? Beit Hillel's got a very good point. But of course, Beit Shammai has very good answers. Beit Shammai said to Beit Hillel, no, right? They disagree. There is a difference between that night and the following day. In fact, they're not the same. If you say with regard to a woman who miscarries on the 81st day, that she is obligated to bring an additional offering, this is logical, right? Fine. The morning of the 81st, she miscarries. Well, as she emerged into a period that is fit for her to bring her offering, right? They're saying that since the morning has come, she is now able to bring an offering. So if a miscarriage happens before she brings that offering, then it doesn't matter. It's still a separate miscarriage and means that you need to have two offerings. But in the nighttime, right? In the nighttime, would you say the same with regard to a woman who miscarries on the night of the 81st day, the previous evening, where she did not emerge into a period that is fit for her to bring her offerings, as offerings are not sacrificed at night, right? How can you obligate her to a second offering when she hasn't had a chance to offer the first offering, right? She is still in a waiting period, not because of impurity and all of that, but simply because the temple is not open at night, right? It's like somebody who gets a check on Sunday night and she wants to take it to the bank. Technically, yes, according to Judaism, she got it Sunday night, but there's nothing she can do with it. Forget about depositing your check by scanning it with your phone. I mean, in the old days when you had to actually go into the bank, right? Until the bank opens, she can't do anything with it. And Beit Shammai is saying until the temple opens on the morning of the 81st day, she shouldn't be obligated for any new offerings because she hasn't had a chance to discharge the first offering. So therefore, an additional miscarriage can simply be bundled with the sacrifice that she is currently waiting to do. All right.
We're talking about two miscarriages.
Well, one live birth or miscarriage, and then a miscarriage.
Like in the evening one, in the morning the second.
No. In 80 days ago, one, and now 81 days later, the other. You can't have two miscarriages in 12 hours.
Yeah, that's why I was totally confused.
Yeah, no. So as we talked about a little bit from the section in Tazria, we have an 80-day window for when there's a girl that's born. And that counts whether it was a miscarriage, especially one that you couldn't identify the gender of the miscarriage, or if it was a live birth where it was a girl. You have the 2 weeks where she is like Nida, where she is ritually impure and separated sexually from her husband. It's also a good idea anyway, following a birth. And then that's followed by...
Sorry, Rabbi, how many days separate from the husband?
For the birth of a girl, it's 2 weeks. For the birth of a boy, it's 1 week. And then after that, there is 66 days, additional days, where any signs of blood is considered tahor. It's considered ritually pure. It's not a problem. It doesn't render her impure. It doesn't mean she has to re-separate from her husband. So during those 66 days, if her and her husband want, they can be intimate. And any signs of blood is nothing that has a legal status.
For
so
66 days.
Right. So total 14 plus 66 is 80 days.
That she had the time to bring the sacrifices.
Well, she can't bring it before that time. She has to wait 80 days and then bring it the 81st. So during that 80-day period that she can't bring the sacrifice, but she still has the obligation waiting to be fulfilled, If she miscarries during that period, whether the first one 80 days ago was a live birth or whether it was a miscarriage, if she has an additional miscarriage, because you can't have a live birth after 80 days, because that's not how long it takes for a baby to come out. If she miscarries during that 80 days, then it is bundled into the sacrifice that was initially triggered by the original birth or miscarriage on that first day. If it happens after 80 days, then she has to bring a second sacrifice for that new trigger.
So Beit Hillel say that just one sacrifice for both situations, and Shammai say two sacrifices.
No, it's
No.
actually reversed. So everybody agrees that if there is a birth and a miscarriage inside the 80-day window, that you only need one sacrifice. Everybody agrees. And everybody agrees that if there is a birth, 80 days, and then a miscarriage on the daytime of the 81st day, that you need two sacrifices. Everybody agrees. The argument is only if there is the miscarriage on the night of the 81st day, the Erev of 81st day. And in that case, Beit Shammai says only one sacrifice is still needed. And Beit Hillel says, nope, two sacrifices because we're out of the 80-day window.
Okay, got it.
All right. So the argument that Beit Hillel made in response to the Beit Shammai made to Beit Hillel was she couldn't have brought the sacrifice before the daytime of day 81 anyway. So therefore, she wasn't able to do it. She wasn't fit to do it because she had to wait till the temple was open. She had to wait till daytime. Therefore, if she miscarries in the night of the 81st, she doesn't have a new period of obligation. She is still in the original 80-day obligation window. And therefore, she cannot incur a new obligation. You can't make her obligated to something else because she hasn't discharged her first obligation. So you can't ding her twice when she hasn't even had the chance to do the first one. The window is still open until she makes that sacrifice, or at least could have made the sacrifice.
So that's Shammai.
That's Beit Shammai's opinion, yes.
That makes a lot of sense.
They both make a lot of sense, right? I mean, that's the thing. They both have good positions. And that's why, remember in Yevamot, Elo ve'elo divrei Elohim chayim, right? These and these are both the words of the living God, right? Because both interpretations do fit both the terms, the law, and the feeling of what's going on. Yes, Aaron.
Hey, Rabbi, is there anywhere else where anywhere in the Talmud where they distinguish between an opportunity to bring an offering as a break?
I'm afraid I do not have the encyclopedic knowledge to answer that question. Sorry. It's a great research project to see whether or not this phrase of the period that she is fit to bring an offering, whether that occurs in other places. It wouldn't be too hard to try and look that up, but not right now.
All right, but the Mishnah doesn't always follow consistent rules, right?
No, it doesn't always follow what we would perceive as a consistent rule because often there are multiple layers of consideration. And sometimes we don't always notice the subtlety that they are building off of. All right, so Beit Hillel is going to push back. Right, yes. Beit Hillel said to Beit Shammai, but let the case of a woman who miscarries on the 81st day that occurs on Shabbat prove that this distinction is incorrect, right? They're going to bring a different case study and show you that your rule doesn't actually hold. Because if she miscarries on the 81st day of and that 81st day happens to also be a Shabbat, as she did not emerge into a period that is fit for her to bring her offering. Why not? Because individual offerings are not offered on Shabbat, and nevertheless, she is obligated to bring an additional offering, right? So they've got Beit Shammai in a corner. They say, wait. If this whole issue in your mind is about she isn't in an area where she is able to bring the offering, so she cannot incur a new obligation, wait a minute, if the 81st day was Shabbat, and during the daytime of Shabbat, which you agree is now a separate day and she has to bring a second offering, why is that so? Because by your logic, she shouldn't have to, because on Shabbat, an individual is not allowed to bring an offering. Yes, there are community offerings that are done, the Tamid offering and the Musaf offering that are done for the community, but an individual cannot bring a required sacrifice on Shabbat that's only required for him or herself, for the individual. So she is obligated to a new sacrifice because the baby was, or the miscarriage happened on the 81st daytime, but she technically couldn't have brought an offering. It wasn't a window of opportunity for her because she wouldn't be allowed to bring it on that day anyway. So why is she able to incur a new offering when it falls on Shabbat, but she's not able to incur a new offering when it comes in the evening? Neither time is fit for her offering, and yet in one she does and the other she doesn't. Again, very good counter argument, Beit Hillel. We can see why these two are both the giants of their generation for the academies. Beit Shammai replies, but Beit Shammai said to Beit Hillel, no, there is a difference between these two cases, between the miscarriage in the evening and the miscarriage on a Shabbat. If you said this ruling with regard to a woman who miscarries on the 81st day that occurs on Shabbat, the reason is that although Shabbat is unfit for the sacrifice of an individual offering, it is fit for sacrifice of a communal offering, whose time is fixed, meaning the daily offering, the Tamid offering. Would you say the same with regard to a woman who miscarries on the night of the 81st day, as the night is completely unfit, since neither an individual offering nor a communal offering is sacrificed at night? So Beit Shammai rebuts by saying, yes, it's true, an individual can't bring an offering, but that doesn't mean new sacrificial obligations don't happen on Shabbat. We know they do because we have a community offering that happens on Shabbat, and that is an obligation. So even though she cannot do it, the window of obligation does begin ticking during the daytime, even if that daytime is a Shabbat, and even if she can't bring it herself. So again, a very good rebuttal by Beit Shammai.
Yeah, but you cannot compare community sacrifice with personal one. It's not the same because it's not connected with you personally and your miscarriage on your birth. It's just community. So it's not this. You cannot compare. It's like comparing apple with orange.
Right. Which, by the way, they're both fruit. So you can't compare.
Apple with potatoes. Okay.
They're both vegetables, meaning they're both part of the plant. But that's not the point. You can always compare anything to anything. There just may not be much to compare. But you're right. It's not a great argument because there does seem to be a distinction between an individual and the community. But what Beit Shammai is trying to say is that the community recognizes that a new period of obligation begins daytime in the 81st. And even if she can't bring it, it is a period of obligation, and therefore she can. But the nighttime is not a period of obligation for anyone, right? There's no new sacrifices for anybody at nighttime. And therefore, you can't say it's a period of obligation. Aaron?
Yeah, back to what Natan was saying though, but I thought the whole heart of Shammai's reasoning is the ability, and she still does not have the ability to bring the sacrifice until after Shabbat. And back to obligation, Hillel also makes the point that, as you said, with the abnormal discharge, the obligation would kick in at nighttime. So Hillel does show both that it's about ability. He disproves that one, and then he proves his own point by saying, if it's about obligation, there is obligation.
Right. Well, we're actually going to get to Beit Shammai's attempted rebuttal to Hillel's issue about the discharge and purity. But yes, you're right. Beit Shammai's opinion is not a slam dunk, and Beit Hillel's opinion is not a slam dunk. But let's get that second half of Beit Shammai on the table so we can compare both parts. Because Beit Shammai hasn't actually answered Beit Hillel's original question. Remember, Beit Hillel's original question was if the woman had a discharge during the evening of the 81st day, that it would definitely be considered ritual impurity. So why would we make a distinction between her ritual impurity, which happens night or day, and with the liability for miscarriage to a second sacrifice? Beit Shammai answered that by going into this question of when are you able to bring a sacrifice, which doesn't actually answer the ritual impurity question. It's a different argument altogether. But Beit Shammai is now finally going to loop back around and give us an answer to the ritual impurity question. So Beit Shammai add, and as for the ritual impurity status of the blood, meaning again, Beit Hillel's opinion that the two time periods are equal with regard to the halachot of ritual impurity, which was Beit Hillel's original objection, this does not prove what the halakha should be with regard to offerings, right? Fine, yes, it's true about ritual impurity, but that doesn't mean it has to apply also for the obligation for sacrifice for a miscarriage. As with regard to a woman who miscarries before the completion of the term of 80 days, her blood is impure, like the blood of a woman after childbirth, and nevertheless, she is exempt from bringing the offering. So Beit Shammai's opinion here at the end is that there's not always, in his opinion, this perfect parity between the status of purity and obligation. Because after all, if she has a miscarriage during the 80 days, meaning before the 81st debated evening, but during the regular day, 49, then everybody agrees that she has to bring an offering, even though her status, if she were to have a discharge, wouldn't change. So whether or not her status changes by discharge does not seem to be linked to whether or not she is obligated to a sacrifice in the case of a miscarriage. Because during the middle of the purification process following the birth, that 80-day window, any discharge is totally ignored, but any miscarriage is absolutely counted, but is counted as being exempt under the major offering. So, it doesn't seem that ritual purity is always going to, or susceptibility to ritual impurity is always going to imply a parallel obligation or susceptibility to obligation with regards to a miscarriage. You can have one without the other in both directions.
Rabbi, what is the word melot? Here said at the end, the law of blood is not conclusive since if a woman aborts within the melot period, her blood is ritually contaminated, yet she is exempt from an offering. Melot
Right.
means the 80 days?
Exactly. That's the fulfillment of that time, the completion time.
Okay.
The fullness of the time. Make sense?
Mhm.
All right. Now, I don't want to go into this in too much time because it's already taken 40 minutes because it is a complicated argument, and that's good. Just as a little taste, this is what studying the Talmud is more like. In the Talmud, you get different opinions on a particular topic, and then you have the sages argue over the different things that it might be comparable to, finding other comparisons, other issues where the rule would seem to imply that the answer should be according to their opinion on either side of a different topic. So if you like this, great. If you're following this, great. That means that you'll probably enjoy Talmud. If you found this exceedingly confusing of what they were each trying to say and the points they were trying to make, don't worry. That's normal when you're getting used to the Talmudic style of argumentation, of how each are bringing different comparisons and then showing that they fit or don't fit the different sides of the argument. And that's something to get gradually more accustomed to in this style of argumentation. Just a reminder again, what I always love about studying in this way is that you see that you can have people who have two 100% opposite opinions. Yes, you need an obligation. Yes, you need a sacrifice. No, you don't. And they're still talking to each other. They're still hearing each other's arguments. They're still answering with meaningful and on-topic rebuttals. This is what we call an argument in good faith. This is an argument, a machloket l'shem shamayim. Right? This is an argument for the sake of heaven, not for the sake of arrogance, not for the sake of political points, not for the sake of culture wars. This is an argument about how do we properly interpret what God has asked us to do in this rather unusual circumstance, where again, we only have a period of like maybe 12 hours where this could even happen, perhaps less if it's during the winter months and the nighttime window of question is even smaller. But this is how you have a good argument and are able to move things forward. And I will also point out that Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai, even though they argued about things like this, their children still got married to each other. They still allowed their sons and daughters to get married, even though they had very different opinions on many topics. So you can argue without fighting. All right. And now let's look at Mishnah 7, which has one of, I say this all the time, but it's true, one of my favorite passages. It's got a great bit of social legislation of what power do you have to try and fix a bad situation.
But Rabbi, who won the argument at the end?
As near as I can,
the argument for Hillel?
as near as I can tell, Beit Hillel wins.
Hillel wins.
All right. So, continuing the same topic, but with a different twist. Not the topic of the 81st day, but the topic of the miscarriages or births and the multiple sacrifices you might or might not have. With regard to a woman who has, in her case, uncertainty concerning 5 births, and likewise a woman who, with whom there is uncertainty concerning 5 irregular discharges of blood from the uterus, right? Ziva, right? These are special cases where there is such an unusual flow that each one is considered to be a separate issue. Maybe she brings one offering, and then she may partake of the meat of offerings, right? As part of her purification ritual, she has to bring an offering. But because of the doubt with regards to these 5 and 5, these 5 different cases in each case, she only brings one offering to cover the bundle of 5, whether she's 5 of births / miscarriages, or whether it's 5 with regards to the discharges.
We talk about the 80 days. Inside the 80
well,
days.
it's 80 days, but in the case of miscarriages, the clock could be reset. If she has one miscarriage and then 70 days later has another miscarriage and then 70 days has another miscarriage, she never reaches the point where she can actually bring a sacrifice until 5 of them have gone by.
I thought they didn't reset the clock.
For the, in this case,
I thought the third one you'd have to, on the third one, you'd have to bring 2 offerings.
I don't believe that if it's in this particular case where they are uncertain that's the case, because it's pretty hard to get 5 miscarriages within 2 months, because it's impossible to see that there was an actual miscarriage. There's not enough of a development for there to be a recognizable tissue in the discharge.
Right.
But she has 80 days from the first miscarriage, correct, to bring the sacrifice?
No, she has 80 days. She has to wait until she can bring a sacrifice. She can't bring it during those 80 days.
She cannot.
Cannot. She is in an 80-day period of waiting.
So her 80 days start counting from the last one, the 5th one.
Right. In the case where we have these 5, yes.
Okay.
Yes. In the case where there's only 1, then it would be after the first one.
Yeah.
All right. Now, if she experienced 5 definite discharges of a zava or 5 definite births, she brings 1 offering, and then she may partake of the meat offerings. right? So she can bring a one offering to cover those. That's like we just saw in the last section, that if there were 5 definite, that then within the window, then she only brings one offering. And that means that she can, and then she can eat of the offering. And the remaining offerings are an obligation for her, meaning after she does the first one, she still has to do the other 4 for these, sorry, I think I misspoke, for these 4 separate definite births, right? So she brings one, which allows her to then partake of the offerings, right? That makes her ritually pure. She has done that. And then she can still fulfill the other obligations. But that would mean that she would have an outstanding debt of the additional pairs of birds that need to be offered. Now, the point that gets rather interesting happens in the second half. There was an incident where the price of nests, that is to say, a pair of birds, stood in Jerusalem at 1 gold dinar, which basically means as the great demand for birds for the offering of a woman after childbirth and a zava led to an increase in price, right? Our sages understood economics, supply and demand. Yes, Natan?
Sorry, Rabbi, before moving to that, why she can't bring the 5 at the same time? Why only 1 and she has a debt of 4? Why she cannot bring 5, the 5 sacrifices together?
Well, you mean, why can she not bring sorry. Right, so these 5 are not bundled together, right? These are 5 separate events. So she has, like, let's just use regular births, right? Your first child is born, you bring an offering. Your second child is born, you bring an offering. Your third child is born, your fourth, your fifth, you bring offerings for each of them.
So she can't bring the 5 offering at the same time and say, oh, this is separate, because we say that it's all a kavanah. She can say, oh, this is a kavanah for the first, this is a kavanah for the second, this for the third. And she had the 5 together, but with the kavanah for each separately.
So if she had delayed all of the ones until the very end, she technically could do that, yes.
Okay.
Yes, Aaron?
Rabbi, real fast, if she's delaying him 5 times, it could potentially be over a year till she actually has to bring the offering, right?
Oh, absolutely. Especially if we're talking about live births. But even if we're not talking about live births, but miscarriages, it could greatly extend the time. But what's novel in this particular Mishnah is the idea that because of the need for women to bring additional offerings for each definite birth or each definite, discharge, the bird sellers are able to charge a gold dinar for birds that are fit for the sacrifice, right? There are more women than there are easy available birds, and so you can charge more for your birds. Or indeed, this may actually be price gouging, meaning that this may not actually be the fair price, but it's the price that they're able to get. Because, hey, you're at the temple, you need these birds, you have to do the mitzvah, so you want the birds and make God happy, or do you not want the birds and you're a sinner? So 1 gold dinar, please, here you go, have fun at the altar. Right? It seems like this is a problem. Now, why do I think this is a problem? Why do I think that the rabbis thought this is a problem? Well, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel said, I swear by this abode of the divine presence, meaning he is swearing by the temple. That is not a casual phrase, right? To swear by the temple, that basically means like, if I don't uphold my oath, may the temple be destroyed, right? That's not the kind of thing someone says lightly, right? I swear by this abode of the divine presence that I will not lie down tonight until the price of nests will be in silver dinars. And so what did he do? Ultimately, he entered the court and taught, a woman who has in her case 5 definite discharges of a zava or 5 definite births brings one offering, and then she may partake of the meat offerings. And the remaining offerings are not an obligation for her. And as a result, the price of nests stood that day at 1/4 of a silver dinar, as the demand for nests decreased. Now, that last part is a bit debated by the different commentaries. That's one translator's interpretation. But let's work out exactly what he's saying here. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel is saying, right now, the women who are coming and their families by extension are being gouged. They are being overcharged for the birds that they need for this mitzvah. So if this doesn't change, meaning if the price doesn't return to a proper amount, meaning to a level that is fair, both for the sellers as well as for the families that need it, then I'm going to be teaching this law that in fact you don't need all 5, but you only need 1, which means you bird sellers are going to see your demand drop through the ground. Now, as a result, the price went down. Now, there's a lot of different interpretations of what happened here. Some people argue that Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel merely threatened this teaching, and that when the bird sellers saw the threat, they changed their prices so that Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel would not go through with it. Others say that he actually did teach it, and that meant that the market fell and the price went down as it was. But everybody agrees that he was trying to take steps to rectify the economic imbalance that was occurring, that was keeping women and their families from fulfilling this mitzvah. That people were being priced out of their ability to participate in the mitzvah, and Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel was doing what he could, one way or another, to try and shift that back into having more people being able to participate. Aaron, I see your hand.
Yeah, briefly, just out of curiosity, is this like does anybody take this as evidence that females were miscarrying at a large rate at this time? Because if they're doing it so much that it actually changed the price of birds, they must have been miscarrying a lot.
So the short answer is we don't know. We know archaeologically and from testimony of texts that miscarriages were more common in the past than they are now. That much we do know, and be very thankful for good prenatal care. Make sure that you're conferring with your doctor and following his or her advice, and all of those important things that we now have that allow many more pregnancies to go to full term than they used to. But what would count as an abnormal amount of miscarriages, I can't say precisely. I'm not enough of a historian of the medical conditions of different time periods. I know that it was more than it is now, but I don't know whether it was abnormal in the time of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. It could be that it wasn't abnormal, but it was just the bird sellers figured out they had a captive market. And it doesn't have to be that there were more miscarriages or discharges for that matter, just that the bird sellers had a monopoly and they worked together. They colluded to jointly raise the price, saying, hey, if we all sell for 1 gold dinar, if we set a uniform price that's really, really high, we'll all make money, and why not? And this is sort of an early form of guild standardizing, and it was not to the benefit of the population.
Right, but you had to have enough girls mischarged that they'd have the opportunity to do that.
Well, you had to have enough that they felt they could get away with it, perhaps, yes. But really, even if it was only 1 or 2, that's plenty to be able to overcharge, as long as there's no legitimate competition. And if everybody who was selling birds were all on the same page, all in the same boat, well, it's like OPEC. If you actually get all of OPEC to manipulate their production, they can change oil prices. But if one breaks, then it doesn't happen. And that doesn't have anything to do with our demand. That only has to do with their manipulation of supply. Natan.
What is amazing for me is with easiness that Rabbi Gamliel changed the Masoret and the Torah Be'al Peh, because the Torah Be'al Peh, the Mishnah came from Moses, and everyone agreed, and he was very easy, like, okay, so why change? And no one say nothing, like, come on, are you changing all our tradition of Torah, Moshe, Be'al Peh, like that, because you decided one person? That's what for me is more amazing of anything else from this story.
Oh, no, so you're not the only one to notice that. And this is a text that has gotten a lot of commentary over the centuries for precisely that reason. Is Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel really suggesting that he has the authority to change halakha that he would have thought was d'oraita from the Torah in order to address a social need? In the modern conversation of halakha and how we make halakha, there are many people who argue, I argue that they're pretending, that no outside information about society and societal values should ever even be mentioned in the discussion of what the actual ruling of a case should be. And then there are many, myself included, who point out that not only is that simply impossible, because anybody who sits down to make a ruling has an entire history of social ideas, practices, and opinions, but that the halakha is meant to actually meet the needs of the community within the boundaries of Torah, and therefore it's better and more honest and easier for us to then argue about when those other values might be made explicit, when they are actually put on the table. And then we can say, no, that isn't right, or no, that is insufficient justification. And in this case, he is giving a model. Now, the really interesting thing is, did he really go through with it, or was this just a threat? Did he actually institute it, or did he merely make a public declaration in order to convince the sellers that he might go through with it, and that they were better off lowering the price than forcing him to teach it this way? Now, was it within his authority? Of course, right? Between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, like we saw in Mishnah 6, we know that there can often be lenient and stringent opinions that obligate to more sacrifices and opinions that obligate to fewer. And as much as we believe that Mishnah is part of the Torah She'Ba'al Peh, the oral Torah that comes from Sinai, from Mount Sinai, we also know that there are arguments within the application of certain cases. And Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel would simply be saying, you know what, I think I'm going to rely on this more lenient opinion about the obligation, and that threat was probably enough. He wasn't trying to uproot Torah, he was merely choosing from within the spectrum of acceptable opinions. This is something that I believe very strongly is the strength of the conservative movement, that we don't argue that there is one and only one acceptable opinion, but we do argue that there are limits to what counts as an acceptable opinion. You know, if someone says that ham cheeseburgers are perfectly fine, or, you know, bacon double cheeseburger, I'm going to say that's outside the acceptable bounds of limits. If someone wants to argue about swordfish, there are absolutely good arguments to be made within that parameter of acceptable, some that will seem more lenient and others that will be more strict. And if people take different positions, I'll be happy to argue with them, but I'm also not going to condemn them if they're taking positions within those brackets along that spectrum. Yes, Aaron.
Is that unique to the conservative movement? Because I thought modern Orthodox did that a lot too. And even the outside the ultra Orthodox did that to some extent as well.
Well, it depends upon the community and the organizations, right? So modern Orthodox indeed does have some members and some organizations that do feel that way explicitly. Some do implicitly. I would also argue that historically, like in this case and many others over the centuries, we see communities making choices like this that are appropriate within their communities. Ultra-Orthodoxy may do this, but they very rarely admit that this is what they are doing. That is to say, it's not part of the conscious or open aspect, the transparency of the decision-making process. And that I consider to be problematic. Halakha and judicial decisions are meant to be on the table, open, like peer-reviewed, published science reports. They are not meant to be a closed black box where you give me the question, I will process it and then give you an answer, but I'm not going to tell you what I do. Every math teacher will tell you, you have to show your work. And that's very much the case in Judaism. If you can't explain the steps that led you to your decision, then how can we have that beautiful argument like Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel?
But
And
after that, yeah.
and you
That's
can't
not-
only argue by authority, right? The Rambam's son, Abraham ben Rambam, he, in his introduction to one of the writings, brilliantly summarized that Judaism only allows argument from authority from one, that's God, but everyone else has to argue based upon something that is understood and seen and communicated so that we can actually all debate it, something that is shared. And that means no matter how clear you think your opinion is, you still have to explain why it's clear in order to convince me or someone else.
And
And
that,
that is-
that
go ahead.
was the problem with the Rambam. When he wrote the Mishnah Torah, he didn't write any of the quotes and citations. So that's
Exactly.
why many rabbis burned the book.
So the Mishnah Torah didn't get a lot of burning, but it did get a lot of criticism, and it got a lot of updating. Because exactly your point, when Rambam wrote the Mishnah Torah, he only included the conclusions without any explanation, and many of his conclusions were interpretations. They were not universally agreed upon by Jews in every community. So by not giving his explanation for why he ruled in one place or another, that was considered very radical and very problematic.
Mhm.
So many commentators went back and wrote commentaries on Rambam to fill that in. Many went back and put in all of the footnotes to tell you where in the Talmud this argument occurs so that you can go back and look at the original discussion. And many others pointed out that while it's a nice commentary on the halakha, it's not very useful for anybody that's making a difficult decision. Sure, if you're handling easy cases, it's nice to be able to quickly look up something that might be a rare issue. But if you're handling a hard case, well, all those details matter. And if you don't share them with the person, then they can't just study your book and know what to do. They still need to go back to the original discussions and debates in order to understand the underlying issue, to see whether or not there is some unique detail of your case that might render a different answer. I'm afraid there's no shortcut. There's no cliff note, as I grew up with calling them. There's no shortcut version of learning what's the right thing to do. It is a constant process with lots of good arguments and debate, and constantly needing to be updated as we learn more and as we continue to think through things with new information or new argumentation. And that is something that we should be glad of and celebrate. Judaism cannot be reduced to a pamphlet or even the Mishnah Torah. It's an incredibly helpful guide and useful tool in our toolbox of finding answers, but it is not one and done. I know Rambam said in his introduction that you should be able to read his book along with the original Torah and go on to study philosophy and not have to worry about learning anything else. But on that, I disagree. And so do most of the sages that came after him.
But Rabbi,
Yes.
just out of curiosity, one of the arguments you hear in the Orthodox community against the conservative is that it leads to basically a statutory process or a judicial activist process of changing halacha. Is that true to some extent?
It's true that that is part of halacha, right? Halacha requires interpretation. It requires judicial activism. And people that argue that there's no such thing as judicial activism within Judaism, or as we talked about in the Sunday group, that somehow all Jews are meant to be strict constructionalists when reading the Torah and Jewish law, simply is either being dishonest or doesn't understand the process of Jewish law. I will recommend to anybody that wants to know more about this, one from a wonderful source, Joel Roth's book, The Halachic Process, is a great, not too long, but not too easy book that explains how halacha has worked for 2,000 years. And he does a very good job of explaining that there has always been judicial activism, meaning that rabbis have had to make decisions that led to new circumstances for their community in response to new circumstances in the community, and that has been built into Judaism for as long as we've had rabbis, and that the main limit on that is good sense, is soundness, is being a reasonable person, and whether or not the community will abide by it. That technically it's a very powerful tool, and one that is not used and shouldn't be used with reckless abandon. But that's just an argument of whether it is warranted or unwarranted, whether the argument is sound or unsound. It's not an argument about whether that's what happens. It is what has happened, what is happening, and will happen in every community. I defy you to find me a community that looks today exactly like it looked 200 years ago or even 50 years ago. There are no carbon copy clone Jewish communities that have not changed their practice and interpretation of halakha over the last 50 years, let alone over the last 500. And otherwise is simply either disingenuous or not acknowledging our own history.
But by Rabbi, I thought by judicial activists, most people consider that to be judges acting as legislatures.
So what most people mean when they say judicial activism is a judge made a decision I don't like.
All right.
That's really what most people mean when they say that.
But most
If
lawyers
someone says in American politics or Jewish halakha, judicial activism is, I disagree with your interpretation. I don't think that's where we should be going. I think the position that I have or that preceded you before your interpretation was preferable. And everybody's allowed to say that. That's okay, right? We don't have a Jewish pope. We can't force everybody to agree. And it's fine if somebody wants to believe that the old version was better or their version of change is better than the other one. But to claim that they're doing judicial activism, but I never would, is simply not true.
But no, I thought I hear that a lot in politics, but most lawyers consider judicial activism to be the judges basically legislating from the bench.
Right, and there can be an argument to be made in the American system, although I think it is overdone and usually overwrought and often very hypocritical, where people condemn judicial activism when it's from an opposing view than their own, but support it when it's their own. But there can be at least a sliver of an argument on that point in American system if you're being consistent and not hypocritical, because America has a legislature. We do actually have a Congress. Both locally in our states and also nationally. And so therefore, yes, there is room for new legislation to take place and amendation of legislation. Judaism does not have a legislature, right? God is not giving us new mitzvot every day. That's one of the main reasons we don't recognize that there is a Brit Chadash, that there is a new covenant or a new testament. God gave us the Torah and said, this is it, no more in heaven, no more across the sea. So the only way that we can know how to apply Torah to us each and every day is through rabbinic interpretation. And if you want to call that judicial activism, I still think that smells of pejorative. But yes, I'll absolutely agree that that's what we've got, because that's all we've got.
Rabbi, I know that you say that this is our last shiur for a month.
That's right.
Can I give a suggestion? And for me, it's very, very important if we finish the year strong and we start the year stronger. Meaning having the last shiur, the last Wednesday before Rosh Hashanah, and the first Wednesday after Rosh Hashanah, for me, it's very symbolic if we have a shiur and we are studying. It's like ending and starting the year with studying, with a strong, learning Torah. Is that any possibility?
So,
or at least a shorter one, at least 30 minutes.
Let me just double check what that would actually look like, right? Because the first Wednesday after Rosh Hashanah, as I thought, is Kol Nidre. And then the second Wednesday after Rosh Hashanah is Sukkot. And the third Wednesday after Rosh Hashanah is Simchat Torah. right? It's this year, it's all Wednesdays for the holidays.
And what about next week?
So if you want to do a shorter one next week, I can make that work. We can do like half an hour next week. It's just beginning the next section. We can just do a little bit of a taste. We can do half an hour next week. Is that okay with other people, or did everyone else already make plans? Okay, so we'll aim for like a 30-minute session next week, and we'll begin chapter 2.
Thank you, Rabbi.
It's very hard for me to say no when students want to learn.
Thanks, Rabbi.
Thank you. Yes,
Right.
have a great day.
And everyone, in case I don't see you next week, if you're not able to come, let me just say Shana Tova. May it be a wonderful new year for you. May you continue to learn and grow. And all of this just continues to develop the soul in a way that really is so complementary to what we do in prayer and what we do in our actions day to day. So Yasher Koach for sticking with the Mishnah. I know it is a hard subject. I know it doesn't always seem to be immediately relevant to our lives, but this is a great honor that you do for yourself, and it is a great source of strength that builds you up with profound spiritual muscles in the long term.
Thank you. Amen, Rabbi.
Take care, everyone, and be well.
Bye.
Bye.